Welcome, Vicente, to BeyondPhrenology.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you.
I'm
For the
happy
viewers, Vicente did his Ph.D. with Anthony Shimero at the University of Cincinnati, Department of Philosophy,
Yeah.
followed by his postdoc with Michael Anderson at Rotman Institute of Philosophy at Western University, Ontario. And currently he is doing a second postdoc at University of Murcia, Spain.
Yeah.
And Vicente has been doing some very interesting stuff, which aligns with my personal interests on alternative to the computer metaphors about the mind and brain. And he has also been very elegantly critical about some new developments in neurosciences, which we'll be discussing on this podcast today. So, Vicente, welcome to the show. And why don't you tell us something about your major motivational drive, which directs your work in the philosophy of sciences?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. Actually, I think my main direction of work since the days of my dissertation is trying to develop a theoretical framework for what we could call an ecological neuroscience. So for those of you that are not familiar with this label of ecological, there's a way to try to understand psychology that is called ecological psychology, that is somewhat opposed to the mainstream theories that understand mental events as a matter of information processing and building up an internal model of the world, etc. Right? Ecological psychology defends a more direct access to our environment and an idea of perception and action in terms of the relationship between organisms and environment, and not as a matter of a brain construction of a model of the environment. So in the context of ecological psychology, I think there's room to approach the typical problems of neuroscience, or at least of cognitive neuroscience. So what's the role of the brain in this organism environment dynamics, right? And this is what I do most of my time. I'm also interested in the history and philosophy of psychology and neuroscience. So I try to approach this ideal of an ecological neuroscience from a broad historical point of view. And then, yeah, I have opinions about other understandings of the brain,
Of course.
and its role in the.
And let me remind the viewers, Vicente's opinion are a bit more elegant than others. At least how he presents his opinions is pretty elegant. Of course, we'll be talking about that, the most sought after topic. So Vicente, so how come suddenly things became ecological? We had psychology, we had neuroscience. What's the need for this? I would say adjective behind these sciences, ecological.
I think there are different ways to answer that question. To me at least, it comes from what I see to be the impossibility of an information processing approach, right? It's not. We often are confronted with the information processing approach first, and we kind of have to deconstruct our beliefs in order to be ecological. In my case, though, I read Gibson before I read Fodor, right? So, but even though even when I was not doing this kind of work, all the inputs we get are compatible with the mainstream information approach. If you see the Matrix or Inside Out in cinema, everywhere is there, right? So I think that when you start thinking about it in a deeper way, you can reach a realization. To me, the main realization is that if we take our basic cognitive skills like perception and action to be a matter of gathering knowledge about our environment so we can act on it, we need to understand where that knowledge comes from. And if you think that it doesn't come from the environment, you always need to postulate some knowledge to deal with the environment that is not a thing that you can really know, that you cannot justify. Every time you think the stimulus you get from the environment is ambiguous or too simple or not, or generally not enough as to support perception and action, you always need to postulate knowledge that comes from other place.
Other place
like that's it. Nobody knows.
Okay.
Or let's say that to me there's no satisfactory answer to that question. And there's no satisfactory answer to that question in philosophy, for instance, because this is in some ways the issue Kant confronted, right? He said, okay, we seem to have some form of necessary knowledge about our environment, or he didn't say environment, right? He said world, right? And this necessary knowledge cannot come from intuition, cannot come from the senses. So it is according to Kant, the transcendental subject, which is this ideal rational being, that the one that it imposes this knowledge about what is a cause, what is a substance, what is necessity, right? The transcendental subject for Kant is a metaphysical being. So it's a being that is out of our scientific explanations, right? But in psychology, we have, to me, similar issue. When we need to explain how the knowledge that we need in order to perception to happen as an information processing event, it's not clear where it can come from. Some people say from past experience, but past experience is based in perception itself, right? So how can you know those past experience if you don't have the knowledge? Or some people say like God is tale, and some people say evolution. Sure, but how, right? I mean, evolution can support anything if you don't give
it's always the baggage has been shifted to the neighbor, and then neighbors and neighbors and neighbors.
So to me, there's this epistemological reason. To me, the other approach is doomed. So the option is to understand that maybe the stimulus is richer than it seems, and we can actually use the stimulus to support the kind of knowledge we need. Interestingly, this is obviously, if for everyone familiar with this is Gibson, right? This is kind of one of the core aspects of the example. But this is in James too. William James was already, he has a very beautiful chapter in the Principles of Psychology on the perception of space, when he argues against Helmholtz's idea that we get a space-less sensations, and through an unconscious inference, we build up the spatial properties. James calls that, at some point, James says that this is pure mythology. and he says exactly that. He thinks like, if we have spatial perceptions at all, they have to be, according to James, on sensation. So he was kind of pointing to the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's no possible inference that goes from no space to space.
Yeah, there's actually a word for that. In Europe, I recently encountered this word. It's pretty well accepted. It's called neuromythology. That how much of neuroscience is actually a myth.
Yeah. So, according to William James in the late 19th century, a good chunk of it.
So imagine now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope not everything is. I mean, I think also we at least people like me, I'm kind of, I guess, 70% a philosopher, 30% theoretical neuroscientist or something like that, or even a cognitive scientist, as I do some experimental work too, but I'm mostly a theory guy who is interested in perception, in action, in memory, in that kind of things. We tend to think that neuroscience is cognitive neuroscience. And actually, if you go to SFN, to the Society of Neuroscience, you find there 10,000 people, and maybe only 1,000 of them are actually interested in perception, action. So the neuroscience are huge.
Not even that much.
Yeah, right. Neuroscience is huge. Neurophysiology is huge. Most of the I would say that most of the neuroscientists work in things that has nothing to do with cognitive stuff.
Yeah, it's molecular neuroscience, cellular neuroscience, systems neuroscience, a lot of other neural tissues, and in general.
So I think that most of that is not a myth.
Yeah.
I think that cognitive neuroscience, which is this kind of field that tries to do cognitive psychology through neuroscience in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Some of these things, I don't know if they are a myth, but it's true that we are not in a very good theoretical or empirical position to make some of the claims that we
I side with you. I think a lot of cellular neuroscience also becomes a myth when we start imposing behavioral or more larger scale interpretations to those.
Yeah,
that's when it starts becoming a myth. Yeah.
I think very wide, very broad claims that are not supported by the kind of restricted experimental setups we have. Although, to be fair, people are trying to improve.
It's in good faith. It's in good faith.
There are many neuroscientists nowadays, or at least many cognitive neuroscientists that are trying to improve the methods, improve the measurements, improve the paradigms within all the restrictions, right? Like, I've spent the summer at the Technical University of Berlin running an experiment that combines virtual reality and mobile EEG, right? So, and we try to make the environment and the task as natural as possible, right? Not to have the people don't move and don't do anything because, right? So there are, as you said, there are good faith approaches and good faith attempts to improve the field. So I hope, like, in the following years, we will have less myths, or at least different, better myths, or something like that.
Less mythological myths.
Yeah.
So you said a couple of things. Very interestingly, you said that you read Gibson before you read Fodor, or you were influenced by Gibson before you were influenced by Fodor, or Fodor kind of arguments. How did that happen? That's pretty unusual.
Yeah, it was. I was just lucky, right? I was okay. To tell the whole story as fast as I can, I was a computer scientist at some point in my life, right? When I was 18 and I went to college for the first time, I was a computer scientist. And I worked in a bank as a computer scientist for a few years. And then at the age of 25, I came back to college to study philosophy. And during my first couple of years there, I was actually a very convinced Kantian. I guess I didn't know much, but I don't know if if I know better now, but I didn't know much at the time.
And you realize that after reading Kant?
Eh?
You realize this after reading Kant?
Yeah, so no, I read Kant,
Okay.
and I was very convinced. And during my third year, during my junior year in college studying philosophy, I spent 1 year in Virginia as an exchange student in a very small liberal arts college called Roanoke College. And there I took a course on American philosophy. And the first book we read there was William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And that book changed my life completely. That book.
How could you elaborate a little?
Yes, it's kind of it's a very cool book that talks about not religion as a theological field, but as a psychological field. So what do we feel when or what people who have religious experience feel when they have them, right? But to do so, at the beginning, he explained his general approach to psychology. And there it starts with a strong critique of a priori knowledge in general. So a strong critique on Kant, and this idea that unless you want to be an idealist, or unless you are a convinced metaphysician, that I don't think James used metaphysician in a proper way there, but that's a different thing. Unless you want to make room for aspects of experience that come from a spooky place, so to speak, you cannot start there. And then you have to start from experience itself and to see how to understand experience itself as you don't need to appeal to this knowledge that you don't really know where it comes from. So as you can see, kind of that thread of there's a knowledge that we need to explain, and we cannot appeal to a knowledge that we don't know where it comes from, is kind of what guides me still, right?
Right.
So I read that book, and that book had a strong impact in me. So then when I came back to Spain to study the last year, I needed to write a honors thesis, right? Like at the end of the degree thesis. And I wanted to do it on William James, actually. But nobody, no professor there wanted to do it on that. So I ended up doing it on Rorty, who is a neo-pragmatist, right? It's a different philosophy. Also, he has interesting stuff, but I ended up to doing that. But on the side, I was talking to a professor here called Paco Calvo, who is actually has had some work on ecological psychology, and he works a lot right now on plant intelligence and that kind of stuff. And when I approached him and I was telling him about William James, he said something like, I know nothing about William James, but have you heard about Gibson? And I said, no. And then he lent me, I think, Gibson 1979, Harry Heft's 2001 book on ecological psychology in context that actually traces the line between James, E.V. Holt, and Gibson. And one paper that was published in a book Paco Calvo edited that is called 6 Principles for an Ecological Psychologist. Michael Richardson, Mike Riley, Shockley, right? So I read that, and I automatically felt, I didn't understand well what I was reading, of course, right? But it felt like, okay, this seems to be what William James was meaning, right? Or something on that side of. And then so I got into the philosophy of cognitive science through those readings, and then I got to the standard thing. But by the time I got to the standard thing already made not much sense.
Not much sense, right? I was similarly lucky because I never came from a psychology background. I was all through engineering, then physics, and then biology and evolutionary biology, animal behavior ethology. And it's when, during my Ph.D. that Dorothy Fragesi, my Ph.D. advisor, she introduced me to ecological ideas and sent me to the first meeting of my life. which was ICPA 2015 in Minnesota, International Society for Ecological Psychology, right? International Conference for Perception Action. And that's when I was like impressed by the work, and I was trained in those ideas. And while I was reading, these computational metaphors at the same time, they seemed to be, they seemed absurd. I mean, there's no head and there's no tail. It's like, right? So yeah. So probably that's the reason we are so convinced, about the other word you used called doomed.
Yeah.
So I found, it's a pretty strong word to say that a lot of information theoretic approaches are doomed. So can you put that word in context? Like, in what sense do you think they're doomed? Given the fact that the most prestigious departments yet at the most prestigious universities are governed by the information theoretical framework, right? And we put billions and billions of dollars in neuroscience research, which is based on this information theoretic framework. And we have one of the best, the most intelligent minds following this metaphor, and also, using that to explain almost everything they see and observe about the brain.
Yeah, doomed. It's a strong word, actually. Yeah. I think doom, because they are trying to solve, from my point of view. I mean, just let me say that I actually support that they try to do it, right? I'm super open to everyone pursuing their own research agenda. Let 1,000 flowers bloom and everything. But if you ask me, of course, I think they are trying to solve an ill-posed problem. So they are trying to solve an issue that doesn't have a solution from the get-go, right? From the very beginning, which is that one, right? That if you assume that any perceptual event requires some non-perceptual knowledge to work, because not everything comes from the input, so to speak, or or that the environment is not giving you resources enough to do so, there's a point in which you are not able to explain where these neural resources come from. And then you have to postulate them for your theory to work, but you are not able to explain them. And in the end, what you are doing there, to me, is to somehow to postulate the same cognitive abilities that you are willing to explain. So, right, like for instance, one of the things that you have to explain when you explain perception is how you are able to discriminate from this input that is a small tree to this other input that is a bigger tree, but that is farther away.
Yeah.
Right. And this is actually what you have to know, right? Whether a small tree close to you or a bigger tree farther away. If in your explanation you appeal to some knowledge from experience, from memory, from a model that solves that issue, you are attributing to some internal resource the knowledge that you have actually to explain. That's the knowledge you need to explain, but instead of explaining it, you postulate that you have it. And then because you have it, you can manipulate and you can discriminate these two different inputs. I think that's not an issue, or that's not about being very smart, or that's not about having better methods. I think that's a core theoretical issue, that you are looking to the problem in the wrong way, and because you are doing that, you are forced to ask for these loans of intelligence, right? That is a thing that you cannot repay afterwards. I think there's a recent paper by William Warren. It's a 2021 paper in iPerception, I think. It's called Information is Where You Find It. I think the first 2 pages of that paper lay out this issue perfectly. Way better than I be able to do it. But the issue,
I'll put the link in the video. Yeah.
The issue in the end is that if you start from a relation of an organism with an environment that has very little resources, you have to look for those resources in your mind, so to speak, or in the mind, and it's not clear that you are going to ever be able to find them there.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of hiding in the rug problem. Always there's something to hide beneath the rug, right? Which you're not able to explain, and then move on to something else which you can. So essentially, a little digression here. How recent is recent in science? So, for example, when we write papers, right, we often say recently authors at all have shown this, right? Sometimes we cite 2021 as recent, sometimes 2019. I have also seen papers which used a 2006 or 2002 paper as recent, and also a 1980s one. So where do you draw a boundary between what's recent in science and what's been ancient? Can we say that recently William James said that?
I think that there's like, if you take 2 poles, like recent in science, in some sciences, recent is the last 3 months, right? Like in artificial intelligence right now, recent means last month, which I'm not going to say if I think that's good or bad, but that it's kind of how the art is. And on the other extreme, you have philosophy, right? Where Plato is part of our common conversations, right? He wrote 26 centuries ago, but we still take it to be recent in some way, right? So I think science is somewhere there, right? I think some of the theoretical aspects of science, you can say recent things like even William James.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a change in what we take psychology to be that happened in the second half of the 19th century. And we are still part of that. So all the kind of things that we see, after American functionalism and Gestalt psychology and behaviorism and cognitive revolution, they are different things, of course, but they are still kind of within this kind of shift. So in some way, it is recent, right? Or in other things, no, they have very, very close friends that work on the neuroscience of memory, for instance. My impression is that their point of view is that some shift in the methods and in the way they process data and that stuff happened around 2010.
Okay.
So they almost don't cite anything before 2010. Because they take to be, the kind of analysis they do with the fMRI signal or with whatever is not as good as it could be, right? There are some things in which some places
kind of going back to the most recent paradigm shift in your field, right? What you attribute a paradigm shift, and that's you call recent and or not so recent.
Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah, I could say so.
Okay,
I could say that there are usually decades, if not more, in which we kind of talk about the same thing, even in quite different ways, but we talk about the same thing. So that's still somewhat.
I agree with you. I mean, science is relatively slow. Whatever we feel, our methodologies, or at least the way we conceive and interpret observations, remains pretty stagnant for a long time.
Yeah.
So now, two major criticisms one can come up, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. One argument can be that how can the majority be wrong? Okay, we have thousands and tens of thousands of people promoting the information-theoretic metaphors, right? And have almost everything they do. The thinking is basically it revolves around everything related to information-theoretic. You know, whether you talk about memory, executive functioning, or so-called any of the mental processes, right? Perception, action, sensation, anything. And then the second criticism is that you're a philosopher, and let's say I'm a neuroscientist with a couple of $1 million of funding, and 10 postdocs and 5 PhD students in my lab, right? How is it that my whole establishment can be wrong? You see, one is a majority question, how can a majority be wrong? And the second thing is that how can a whole research program can be ill-posed without any self-realization? And who are you as a philosopher to tell me? Because you don't deal with the constraints I deal with the data I look at, right? With the experiments I design. So it's very easy. Like, so somebody can argue that words are cheap. Why don't you sit in my shoe of these many neurons firing, and you see those spiking patterns on your monitor, and you see information flowing. You see processing happening.
Yeah. Well, I think these are two very cool questions, actually.
Yeah.
First of all, I would say I would automatically say, yeah, I'm nobody to tell you that you are wrong. I agree. Actually, I'm writing a book that will be out hopefully someday. And part of what I try to say there is that, look, this is kind of the history of neuroscience, or of some relevant topics within neuroscience since the mid-19th century. And you see that constantly through the history, you have the mainstream, whatever it is, and other people doing other things. And among these other people doing other things, at some point in the mid-20th century, you find ecological psychologists up to now, right? I don't want to say that you are wrong and that you should do ecological psychology, but I would like to say, if like me, you read your books and you think about the main tenets of the framework you work in, and you think that something seems to not to be completely right, maybe you could read this other thing and see what happens, right?
Right.
So I'm at the end of the, I mean, I'm, as you say, I'm a philosopher. At the end of the day, I think that we all are kind of wrong, and that whatever the shape of psychology or cognitive science is going to be in 200 years, if we still have something like a world by that point,
Right.
will probably not look neither like information processing nor ecological psychology as we understand it now, right? It will kind of change, and
yes,
maybe
it'll morph.
right. So first, I would say that I do understand that we do different things and we have different commitments. This kind of thing that is very important to me, that that you have to appeal to this knowledge that you don't know where it comes from. To me, it's a deal breaker. To other people, can be, look, we don't really know, but we will. So it's not something that bothers them that much, because they have other
right,
other things that they find to be more important, right? So in general, to the particular scientist or to the particular philosopher that asked me, who are you to say this? I say, no, I mean, I just think there are some issues here, and I think it's worth reading about them, even if you are not as convinced as I am about them. And then talking about the numbers thing, so how can be everyone wrong? It's kind of the same thing, right? I think people, like, if let's say that the 90% of people that work in the cognitive sciences writ large accept the information processing paradigm. Of those people, not everyone takes information processing to be the same thing. Actually, among them, there are many labs that think this other lab is wrong, right? Because the stimulus is not this but this, or because where you have to look is the single neurons or is systems, or like, so
in fact, Louis Favela had this paper, right? Like, even the ideas of encoding and representation is so diverse among people.
Yeah, so my general point about that nowadays is that sure, I think they are wrong, they think I'm wrong, and among them they think some of the others are wrong and that stuff, and that's part. I mean, I think that's fair, right? I mean, as far as we are kind to each other and we respect the work of other people, good, scientific disagreement. I think, though, that the paradigm itself, or the label information processing or computational metaphor, that it's so it still holds because it's utterly vague. It's utterly
spot on.
That doesn't commit you to many things. Only commits you to something like, there's an input-output system. What is the input? What is the output? You can think many things about that, right?
Yeah.
There's some form of encoding that, as you say, people understand in different way, and there's a description between the input and the output and the encoding that can take some algorithmic form, whichever it is.
So if I can put it in more colloquial terms, the rug is big enough that you can hide whatever you want beneath it.
Yeah, it constrains you so little that you can be within the paradigm without much effort, right? And actually, it is some people, when I say this, get angry for some reason. They think that when I say it is vague, it is something bad, and I'm saying actually the opposite. One of the strengths of the paradigm is that it is able to take all the punches.
Yes.
It is able to sit. I think, for instance, ecological psychology is way more restrictive. Either you have ecological information or you don't, right? And there are a little bit, it can be specifying and non-specified.
It's very hard to operate within it. Yeah, as a scientist, it takes a long time to think about an experiment.
So this is kind of it, right? It's pervasive because it is so vague that people that actually don't agree among themselves agree that they all are part of this vague thing, right? And of course there's another sociological aspect, right? That you have been teaching this, the PhD students study that, etc., right?
Yeah, I think the current pyramid academic system contributes a lot to that pervasiveness. Right. So Vicente, on that note, sorry, I was like so mesmerized by how you answered these two questions. I completely missed the track of what I was planning to ask you next. So where do we go from this? I mean, if you follow the ecological approach, so coming back to what you said, that you are more interested in ecological neuroscience, right? We already have ecological psychology, and we have well-established paradigms in ecological psychology, some of which have been more fruitful than others. And you're right, like, we don't have much in neuroscience. We yet don't have labs with very ecological tasks or ecological explanations of neural firing patterns, for example, right? Or ecological explanations of brain imaging data.
Yeah.
So is that something you're trying to do with ecological neuroscience, or is it
Yes.
something different?
No, yeah, it's like to me, to do an ecological neuroscience is something like to find the place of the brain in this story. The typical ecological story is there's this organism environment dynamics, and within those dynamics you find everything you need to explain the perception, action, everything, right?
Yeah.
And I still depart from that point of view. I think information, for instance, is made available in those dynamics, and the control of action, it's not centralized in the brain, but it's it's distributed through the whole biological resources there, right? So I start that, and then when I start there, I say, okay, so what's the brain doing here? If not building up a model of the external environment in order to execute a program, blah blah, right? So, and to do so, I start with the notion of resonance, right? Gibson talks about the brain more than it is acknowledged, actually, but not as much. And his main point is that the brain is not processing messages from the environment; is more like resonating to ecological information.
Yeah.
He actually takes the notion of resonance from Lashley, the 20th century neurophysiologist that also talks about the engram and that stuff, right? So my work, or the way I see the more concrete aspect of my work, is to try to make an operational notion of resonance. That resonance can be a metaphor, and I'm good about that, right? So, but when we try to operationalize that thing, what we should find, and to me, what we should find is that the brain dynamics, however we measure them, I'm doing right now that with EEG, right? So you have kind of the temporal aspect of that. Brain dynamics are going to be constrained by the same ecological information that the organism environment system is constrained in a particular task. For example, if you are in a task where the variable of ecological information that you identify in the organism environment dynamics is tau, which is the typical example, right?
Yeah.
You should find tau in brain dynamics too. Now,
I see.
Where, how, etc. This is what we are trying to explore, right? So there are actually some people already doing something like that, like especially Audrey van der Meer and Ruud van der Bell in Norway are doing this kind of work. And there are other people, especially with regard to tau. There are works with non-human primates too. There are works with neural networks. There's some work that basically takes this operational notion of what resonance is, which is like you have a multi-scale system, and then when you identify, and you can only identify this in the ecological scale, right? And when you identify ecological information at the ecological scale, you will see the system constrained by the same.
Oh, I see. It's kind of a cross-scale kind of interactions. Yeah.
So in a more concrete way, for instance, this experiment I've been running in Berlin during the summer, that hopefully it's going to be out whenever I have time to do the whole data analysis. But anyway, the thing was like, it was a simple interception task in a virtual environment, which shows the the interception task, because it's a task that we know very well in the ecological approach, right? There are many ways to that task has been explored and everything. So we have this task, and then we have EEG, of course, the mocap in the movement, as we have as it is within a virtual environment. We have the position of all the objects and everything, and we have eye tracking too.
Okay.
So our guiding idea is the idea of resonance, but we are doing exploration. We are trying to look to the data in many ways to see where to find these kind of things, if anywhere, right?
Right.
If this operational hypothesis that resonance is this kind of multi-scale constraint works. So this is actually what I'm trying to do now. But I think there are other people doing other things that are also neuroscience, and it's in a slightly different way. There's a Mathieu David and is doing some other interesting work on that. There's this lab at Western University by Jody Cullum that has done cool things about more naturalistic ways to perceive and how to implement affordances there. Like, they have this cool experiment in which they invented this kind of thing where they could put real objects within an fMRI. It was like a tray, a wooden tray, and they could put things inside. And they actually found that one of the typical effects, which is called the repetition effect, right? That when you show a lot of pictures of the same object, there's some
suppression of activity. Yeah.
Right. This happens with pictures, but not with objects.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I think this is an ecological approach, even if even if it's not about resonance.
Yeah, it's not explanatory or interpretive, but it's more like a practical ecological paradigm.
Yeah, kind of, and try to make your stimulus or your stimuli more ecological, so we can study these kind of things. And we have also done another not neuroscience but behavioral study about that, on the difference between how we assess the similarity between objects and pictures of objects and names of objects. And it seems like we assess similarity, which is a form to assess a category, right? Between pictures and between names very closely, but objects are a kind of a different thing. So it can be maybe mediated by affordances, right?
I see.
Because objects have affordances that these other things don't. So
right.
I think there's this interest, and even in computational neuroscience, there's some interesting work. There's a also recent paper. I think it's 2022. I think that's a recent one. A paper by Cao and Cao, which basically they claim here we are providing a mathematical understanding of James Gibson optical array, and they basically use differential topology to see whether there's information out there about object segmentation. I mean, about the occluding edge, right? Which is one of the things. And they find that there's in this structure of light, there's in principle information enough as to distinguish objects, so without the need to learn it, to train. So I think all these things are still kind of scattered bits, but they are pointing to a different way to do.
No, these are beautiful examples. And now if you think about this, I mean, we long realized when we started using machine learning for training, or use machine vision for training on object identification, right? That you need these hundreds and thousands of images to train these models, these neural networks. And we as humans, like kids can learn to differentiate just by one instance of looking at things, right? Which kind of pointed towards the idea that we don't need to form those models as much. Probably the information is always present. You don't even need a previous exposure for a lot of these differentiation tasks.
Yeah. So I think this Lasso paper I was telling you was exactly about that. Like, if you are able to detect this property, right, which is actually a very one point here is that sometimes when we talk about direct perception, or the fact that we don't need that kind of training to do so, some people think that then the property in the optic array is an easy one, and no, I mean it can be a very arbitrarily complex, right? This one is a form of diffeomorphism in the whatever expansion, so it can be super difficult, but it is there. And when you look to the input in that way, to the input or to the structure out there, you can find these kind of things, right?
The optic array is very complicated. I mean, especially when we are looking at things, we are looking at diffused optic array. And diffused optic array is much, much more complex than what we can present in a Euclidean frame of reference, using straight lines.
Yeah.
So, Vicente, how does it all relate to one of my favorite topics, David Marr's idea of a computational neuroscience, the three-layer framework, or the tri-level hypothesis, which is generally called. So, what are the implications of this ecological approach to neuroscience for David Marr and his followers?
It is interesting. David Marr was a super interesting writer, a genius, of course.
Exactly.
I think we can still talk about the three levels if we want to. I mean, the David Marr says in his book that the best computational level explanation of vision he had ever read was Gibson's one, right? He just thought Gibson's one, when you talk about the organism environment system in that way, only gives you the computational level, but you still need to talk about the rhythmic and to the implementation. I think that you can think of some of the details of the Gibsonian approach after Gibson as algorithmic ones, or at least to a level that relates bits that are not in the general descriptions of things, right? Where you identify information, where you identify synergies, where you identify the fractal properties that you guys have been seeing everywhere and everything, right? I think that's kind of, if anything is algorithmic, although it's not an algorithm, of course, but if anything is in that kind of middle layer of description, would be something like that. And then implementation is sometimes a little bit deceiving, because how I say this, I think that implementation can be physiology if you want to, or at least part of it, right? But physiology sometimes is talked about in two different ways. So physiology can be said, this neuron, this action potential, or this general field, or this membrane resonance.
Whatever the unit of measurement we have.
But other people think physiology is that this neuron filters this stimulus, or this neuron selects, or this neuron encodes.
I see.
And I would claim that neither of these three things are physiology. Filtering, selecting, encoding are more kind of psychological attributes than physiological attributes, right? They are more part. They are setting algorithmic powers to the neurons.
So what you're saying is that a lot of what we label as neurophysiology and that we have discovered the physiology is actually not physiologically. We are still at the algorithmic level.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. I don't know if this agrees, but when you say a neuron selects, that sounds a lot like a mental thing, right?
Right, right. As if it has an option.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
can it not select? If it selects, then it should also have the ability to not select, right?
Then there's a very interesting thing about Marr's book that I cannot resist to point out, is that I invite everyone who is interested to read the first paragraph of the introduction of that book. It says something like, I might not say exactly, but he says like to see. He starts saying, what is to see, right? Vision, what is to say? He says, the layman's answer, as well as Aristotle's answer, is to know what is where by looking, right? To know
by looking.
What is where by looking. But then he says, in other words, to retrieve the properties of the real world from an image.
Oh. And so he started with Gibson and then he went to...
It's yeah. This is super interesting. I'm going to kind of say it again. What is to see? Yeah. The layman's answer, as well as Aristotle's one, is to know what is where by looking. In order to retrieve the properties of the real world from an image. To me, the most interesting part of that is in other words.
Yeah.
Because
but it is not. But it is not, no, right?
Kind of, yeah. Exactly. It's like to him saying that knowing what is there or what is that is in other words to retrieve properties from an image.
Yes.
Like why? You know why? Yeah. One thing, you are just describing a thing which is seen that can be explained in many ways. Yeah. In other words, you are already redescribing it as a problem of information processing. Right.
So he immediately put a lens over it. Like you can view this perception only through this lens of retrieving the image, retrieving the information from the image. Yeah.
So it's cool because it's the first paragraph.
Right.
And critically already makes that shift. So
yeah. Sorry.
So then the shift doesn't need to be justified.
Right.
So he doesn't justify why this is you know, recovering the data from an image. No, it's because that's to see. That's, you know, like it's a super interesting thing.
That's a very beautiful point. So I'll ask you one question before using this point, you know, as a segue for the next the most coveted part of this podcast. So the algorithmic thinking, the level of algorithm, is that because of the language? Like, what if, so for example, Louis Barrett argues, or if I'm correct interpreting what she says, she would argue that this whole idea of algorithmic and implementation of algorithm comes because we think in terms of language. And as soon as we are talking about, for example, a gelada baboon who does not have language, the idea that you have this algorithm to implement as a problem, as a solution to solve a perceptual problem just disappears. So, so do you agree with that idea that a lot of it is how we communicate as humans, and we have language that we are thinking the brain works like the same way?
Yeah, I think that's a quite sensible point. Actually, it's the idea that thinking resembles language in some ways is I would say as old as Occam, if not before, right? So it's true that if you explore the history of philosophy and then psychology, we tend to think that whatever mechanism or whatever process is going on has to do with our description of it, or
our description of it.
or it is our description of it. That's what William James called the psychologist fallacy, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like that as we can explain this as being
Yeah.
this, what is going on should be that.
Right. Right.
I think that beyond language, actually, it also has to do with well, it's still language in a way, right? But it has to do with this issue we have, that we need to explain something and we don't really know how, and then we attribute a mechanism that has the power to do so, right? Like it's like explaining the how was it, the dormitive power of opium by the vis dormitiva, right? That the fact that the thing has a power to do so. It's just the kind of things we talk about are so complicated.
Yeah.
And our language is not so good to talk about those things, actually. It's like everyone can do this. If you open your eyes, everyone that is able to see, etc., of course. But if you open your eyes and you look and you see, I don't know, that your bed, a TV, whatever thing, trying to describe that experience is impossible. I mean, you can say there's a door, but the door has a lot of shades of color, has a lot of whatever. If you try to describe that, everything that you see there, you will never end, right? So our language, for good reason, actually simplifies and abstracts, and sometimes it makes it difficult to talk about some of the things we are interested in.
Right, especially when things lie in the details and not at the meta level description.
Yeah.
Right. So coming back to the first paragraph of William James. So, David Marr. Likewise, I think second or third paragraph in the first page of a very highly cited Trends in Cognitive Sciences article authored by Carl Friston, the sentence, given this ergodic assumption, and there is a thermodynamical derivation of free energy principle. Now, we all know that physiology, almost every aspect of physiology and biological, in fact, most physical systems, non-biological systems as well, is non-ergodic, which means that properties or any statistical property in time and in across ensemble is different. And there you have a derivation of free energy principle, which relies on an ergodic assumption and has the audacity to explain almost everything cognition. So, and I know, Vicente, you have wrote some really elegant pieces on free energy principle, especially the recent one that it's a trick and not a treat. A beautiful, beautiful read. Highly recommended. It's one of the best examples of the art of writing, I would say. So, Vicente, would you like to explain a little bit on what exactly is free energy principle? Why is it so pervasive that it just pops up everywhere, like some kind of, I would say, a dominant species of weed, which takes over all the forests.
This is going to be a long answer. No, it's going to. The free energy principle is a principle. I'm going to try to be as charitable I can. I know many people that work in the field. I like them. I'm just disagree with them. Like they disagree with me, but I would say that they would be happy, or at least they would identify with a description of the free energy principle as it is a principle that tells you something like any self-organized system that can be differentiated from its environment behaves as if it minimizes a quantity that is called variational free energy. Variational free energy is actually a information theory kind of quantity. It's not it has relationship with thermodynamical free energy, but it's not exactly that.
Yeah.
It's actually the same or the negative of the elbow of the
Gibbs free energy.
evidence lower bound in variational autoencoders and that kind of stuff. So it's basically a measurement about the difference between two probability densities, right? The lesser the free energy between them is, the more similar that they are, right?
Which relates it to the predictive idea. Yeah.
So what the defenders of the free energy, or the proponents of the free energy principle do, like Freestone is of course the main one, right? But these other people is that you can model any system that basically that has an attractor, but I think in the later derivation they don't even need an attractor.
They don't need anything. Yeah.
You can model any system that has an attractor, or that at the end visits
similar states. Yeah.
As minimizing the free energy of some of its states. And this is a way to infer the states of their environment. So they do that, and there have been many big claims about it. Like, it's a unified theory of neuroscience or of biology, or
but what does it explain?
I don't think it explains. I don't think it is a theory in the way they claim it to be. Actually, I think they are softening the claims during the last few years, last couple or 3 years. I think they see it more as a modeling device than as a theory in general, right? And as a modeling device, is as good or as bad as whatever you can model.
Well, what does it model? Because whenever I try to download any article on free energy principle, it has some abstruse equations with like 3 or 4 parameters or variables which refer to something. But there's no data which is being modeled, right? It's more like some mathematical derivations which are very obtuse.
Yeah, they have on the one hand many papers with these mathematical derivations that are also changing in time a little bit because they are kind of refining it, and they have some simulations that seem to work. But it's true, I think it's fair to say that they don't have still a corpus of empirical data model in a proper way. We might have a little bit here and there, but there's no much there. So, but in principle, actually, I mean, if you, for instance, if you have a dynamical equation to model whatever system, right, whatever behavior, and you model it, you simulate it, you do the stability analysis, you find the attractor, and you can take that and translate everything into the free energy principle modeling stuff, and then you can have the same thing model as if it is doing Bayesian inference. So in principle, you can model anything that you can model with dynamical systems theory.
And what does it add in that sense?
This is a question that I think has not good answer in the literature yet. This is my question, and this is a question that I've been recently in a few talks.
Because I've also asked some physicists, like I gave them free energy principles papers and equations, and I asked physicists, and they couldn't make sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, I know as far as I know, they work with some physicists too, and it seems like the kind of the derivations they do are okay, given whatever assumptions they have. But it's true that to me, at least, it is not clear yet.
What is it? Yeah.
I mean, I think it might very well in the end be a kind of modeling tool that you can use in some situation. It is, I would say that is relatively fair to say today that this can be a modeling tool, but it's also fair to say that it hasn't been applied to the kind of issues we are interested in, right? And I think one of the issues they have is that they set the stakes very high 20 years ago. Since 2005 to 2006, they have been claiming this is the solution to everything. The promises have been very, very, very big, and they haven't been, in my opinion, they haven't been delivered yet.
Yeah.
But at the end, I think we shouldn't forget that science is a social field. We have people doing things here, so sociology work here. Freestone happens to be one of the most successful computational neuroscientists and neuroscientists in general ever, right?
And that's the reason the theory has been so pervasive that you just can't papers without talking about free energy principle.
He has very, very big speakers.
Yeah.
And maybe we got a lot of free energy principle stuff before it was actually ready to deliver things. And that's why I wrote the 2021 paper. It's called the Markov blanket trick.
Yes.
And then they responded. Is an answer to mentalities, but since then, or since 2021, I haven't been following the literature because, it is what it is. It's
no, I mean, you basically, you kind of, I mean, in my language, you basically had a burial ceremony. I mean, what else was required? After you wrote those two articles.
Let's say that I wrote not only me advice
and my kind of Anderson.
We wrote that paper because we wanted to make sense of the free energy principle. Actually, the section 2 of that paper is the derivation of the free energy principle step by step that we gather from scattered places, because we wanted to have everything in one place, right? So to try to make sense of it. And then we had two sections talking about what theoretical issues we saw there, and what issues, some of them more formal, some them less. And I don't think if you ask me today, I have kind of the same issues. I don't think the issues have been answered.
What I found most interesting was that I happened to be a part of this group where people were very religious about free energy principle, and they changed a lot of what they were doing. In fact, once they encountered this idea of free energy principle, almost every article they published has some kind of reference to free energy principle, or they wrap it up around free energy principle. A lot of them were not mathematically literate to be able to understand what free energy principle means, even in its derivation. And the arguments were always hand wavy, coming up with like 2 or 3 variables which define something which defines a lot, which packs a lot, right? And this variable interact with this variable, and finally you have this function, and that's like free energy minimization or something of that sort. Never ever, or you could, like, I don't see any evidence of real fMRI data, brain imaging data, which has been modeled, using those equations. So that's first thing I found very unique about the religious following, right? A cultish kind of following. And the second thing which I found was that I provided this group some input about why free energy principle is fundamentally flawed at some level, according to me. And very soon I had, we had a paper published with a little bit of tweak in the free energy principle resolving this issue. And I was surprised that how can a fundamental theory and fundamental premise be changed, in this sort of manner. So it gave an appearance of this this giant organism which can engulf almost everything in it, kind of a super organism, but yeah, as you said, I always try to understand it, try to see, where it will go, but given how pervasive it is, but couldn't figure out anything.
Yeah, there's I think that this kind of feeling that someone like you or me or other people may have with the free energy principle, that they are able to kind of tweak and accommodate things, has to do with the very nature of the free energy principle as being kind of a part of a Bayesian framework, right?
Yeah.
At the end, the free energy principle is something that, if you put the things in place, allows you to model everything as doing Bayesian inference. Like, if you describe the right generative model, then you can do that. But yeah, of course, if you can tweak that until you fit whatever data you have, and this is one of the general criticisms that those Bayesian approaches have. That as soon as you describe the generative model in the proper way, or in the way that works, you will fit whatever data.
Right. The monster will eat everything.
So that's why, I mean, it's I think that at least some of the practitioners, so to speak, or the developers of the free energy principle, are kind of taming the words, are trying to be more careful about the promises that they make, and they are trying to develop, and I know they are trying to apply to empirical work. So I'm right now in a situation in which let's see what happens in the next 5 years. I'm not super interested in the free energy principle anymore. I think my impression is that I wrote what I wanted to. It was a 23,000 words of paper. And so far I'm good.
So what were the major points? Like I knew, like you raised some concrete issues. Like could you describe a little bit about what were the major issues you thought, starting with the Markov's blanket?
Yeah, I think that our focus there were basically the notion of Markov blanket and the generative model. And the paper was actually called the Markov blanket trick on the aims of scope and the free energy principle. So our point was not that much whether the free energy principle is right or wrong. Actually, we presented the derivation there, and then we assumed that it was right. Whether it is mathematically right or wrong, I know my math, but I don't know that much as to that kind of assessment. So we say, okay, let's grant that this derivation is right. Given that, what are the issues we see? And our issues were like, they were claiming to model everything, but then they agreed, for instance, that they couldn't model things like candle flames. And this is a thing that they accept in a few papers, because candle flame happens to the boundary of the what would be the Markov blanket is so instantaneous that it's not more stable than the internal states. And one thing they need to be able to model using the free energy principle is that the blanket states are more stable than the internal ones, right?
But that comes to ecological psychology, right?
Yeah. So
the boundary between the organism and the environment,
and the boundaries of groups, right?
Yeah.
So then that's why I've talked about the title, because we were interested there in the scope. Okay, you say you model everything, but you don't. I mean, you should be more clear about what you are able to model and what you are able to not. To other things, it is that in their derivation, they start with the typical Langevin equation: x dot equal fx plus noise, and then they say you have these
it's plus noise. Whatever we cannot explain becomes a noise in an additive manner, right? Which is very counter to the resonance idea, or the idea of multiplicativity and noise being informative.
Yeah. So they start there saying, and then you can this kind of face space if you have this, right, and then if you put a Markov blanket there, those whole dynamics are partitioned in external dynamics, internal, and the blanket states. And our point there was, yes, that's good in the abstract. I mean, I do understand what you talk here, but let's try to try to do that in a typical dynamical systems. The HKB, phi dot equals to, which is kind of that, right? With the deterministic part and is that what you partition there, right? Is that phi dot already internal states? And if it is internal states, what are the external states? Right? Because phi dot is relative phase. What is the external state of relative phase? And if it's not the internal state, if it is the whole system before the partition, when you partition it, what are you partitioning?
So you're making an arbitrary boundary.
Exactly. So one claim they have is, it seems in the literature that the Markov blanket is an unproblematic notion, and that allows you to separate internal states and external states in a principled way. And we think it's not. Actually, when you go to any concrete systems, you still can use the Markov blanket to make this partition, and then you can apply the Bayesian inference. But what makes you to put the blanket here, there, or there, it's not doesn't follow from the free energy principle. It comes from other assumptions that you have. So your theory is at least.
That's the thing with a lot of things about free energy principle. A lot of thing is constrained out of those equations and out of those parameters, rather than the principle bringing in those.
Yeah. So this is another thing that we were saying, like it's clear that every time you try to start with the algorithm and the first step is to apply the Markov blanket, you are bringing with you many other assumptions that doesn't depend on the free energy principle, but actually that shape the activity of the principle. That's why we have another paper that we might write someday. That we kind of claim that you have psychological assumptions that are more fundamental than the free energy principle for the free energy principle to work.
Right.
And Aldis, where do you put that thing? Well, if you are a cognitivist, you might put it in the retina, or but that kind of thing. And then also another issue we saw is that there are sometimes some kinds of relations or some kinds of properties or states that doesn't be effectively captured by this internal external thing. One thing sorry, one thing is are relations. You know, there are some relations that cut across this kind of thing. One of them likely affordances, right? But you know that to be taller than other person is not internal or
right. And
right?
and even physiology. I mean, like sweating. You're sweating because the heat, right? Now,
Yeah.
where do you draw the boundary between the heat versus the internal state of sweating?
Yeah. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there are some things in some living systems. There are some theories that say that the internal states not only have a boundary, you know, the typical enactivism autopoiesis is that you have your internal milieu and the boundary that would be the Markov blanket. But importantly, for those living systems, it's not that they have a boundary, but that they create it. And this relationship of constitution, it's also escapes from the
Right.
typical description of
Like when I have my blanket, which is made by Markov and Sons, I create a boundary between me and my surroundings, right?
Yeah.
Pun intended.
And then so kind of relationships. And then we in the last section, we think that there are some issues with the idea of the generative model.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, they wanted to be something the researcher writes down as a researcher, right? Which is good, right? You put there all how you see the world relates to things. Okay. But on the other hand, sometimes they talk as if the organism or the organism studied itself kind of embodied implicitly the generative model. And then it's not very clear how it can be. And actually, if you accept this second reading, the reading that somehow the organism facing its environment makes this Bayesian inference under an implicit generative model, that actually generative model is basically the joint probability of all the relevant relationships between all the states, external.
It's a lot of computation,
right? And it's, if you accept the view that that somehow the organism embodies or instantiates this generative model, you are at the beginning again. You have some knowledge in that generative model,
right,
that you are not able to explain when it comes.
And you are probably the most computationally expensive, because it seems that the idea of free energy principle, with this generative modeling will entail much more computational load than typical information theoretical metaphors ask for.
I think it is possible. To be fair, I think that most of the proponents are trying to avoid this second reading, and they try to go more as they move from this is a general theory of everything to this is a methodological tool. Their view of the generative model moves more from this is something embodied by whatever system we are interested in, but this is something the researcher uses to model the system.
So it is to be most generous. Would you say that it's completely non-ecological from the start, at the very least?
I think that if you take it to be in the substantive way, like the organisms are actually doing this, whatever, it's non-ecological.
Right.
If you take it to be a methodological tool, well, it's a methodological tool like dynamical systems theories. But in that case, I'm not still convinced that I should use it over dynamical systems or over.
So either way, is relating back to where we started, it's doomed.
It's doomed. I mean, it is doomed. I mean,
Time will tell.
it can be done in my mind and still work very well, like the computational metaphor.
Yeah, of
Or
course, of course,
it is doomed, but they are actually thriving, right?
of
So
course, of
maybe
course, of course, of course. That's true. But what I was surprised was that, I mean, let's say free energy principle works and it exists, and yes, the brains are free energy principle machines which follow this free energy principle. What's the motivation behind finding such a principle? I mean, is it from an ecological standpoint, or generally from a very pragmatic standpoint? Is there any space for such general principles in mind sciences? Can they exist as a governing principle in how self-organized systems work?
this is an interesting question, actually. I think there are ways in which the free energy principle approach or the free energy principle framework and some parts of ecological psychology are similar, especially during the 80s, 90s, and with the work of Michael Tarvey, that sadly passed away a few days ago, and Kugler, and all these people that actually started introducing dynamical systems within psychology. In some papers, they have this at least this aim or this drive to find the fundamental principles of the self-organization of behavior, especially in the 1987 book by Kugler
Kelso.
and Tarvey, actually.
Mhm.
You find all of this, right? So
Yeah. And a lot of
so
coordination work by Kelso
yeah,
also, I think, is motivated to find these general principles.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in some way, the free energy principle people are just trying to do the same that has been done, trying to find this thing. We are hearing a lot about it. Again, I think mostly for sociological reasons. Uh, uh, in actually different fields, because philosophy really started talking about this after 2013 with Andy Clark, which is one of the main philosophers of cognitive science, published a BBS paper on this, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of also the thing. Um, so in that way, the free energy principle is not different from these other approaches that try to find a general principle for this kind of thing. How informative it is? I'm ambivalent. Actually, I got a question in about this topic in the last ICEP, in the last conference of the International Society of Ecological Psychology that happened in Mississippi last year. I think, I mean, first principles are good if you want to find them. I'm not a fan of them. I think that the world is complex and that we will find different things different times in different systems, and I prefer to not to be constrained by a principle. Well, will we be able to find it at the end? Maybe, that's kind of the philosophical idea, right? If we really know everything, we will end up in the idea of good,
Right. But
or
you don't begin with it.
yeah. And I guess this is another way in which William James influenced me a lot as a pragmatist, right? William James says pragmatism is the attitude of rejecting first principles, first causes, necessities, and everything. So, I mean, it probably has to be with some scientific temperament. Like if you are a physicist, you are probably trying to look for that.
Yeah.
I'm a psychologist, I guess, or a philosopher, so I see a world with a lot of shades and colors that doesn't have to have a harmony in the end. Like.
Right. And yeah, you can still have an order in the world with a lot of in shorthand chaos.
Yeah.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So exactly how so what are the directions you're taking now? I mean, you have done some beautiful work on resonance and taking ecological ideas to neuroscience and in deconstructing FEP in some ways, or at least highlighting some of the major issues which remain unresolved with it. Which I feel is a great contribution. We need that kind of work in science a lot more frequently, I would say. Yeah, and with that elegance as well. And what are the next some of the next things which you are envisioning as you take your philosophy and background in psychology to more neuroscience?
Uh, well, regarding my own work, I have this quite rich data set that I got in Berlin during the summer. So I'm going to try to work on it a lot. I'm writing a book on ecological neuroscience.
Yeah.
I'm kind of halfway through the book. I hope to finish it by next year. It's a book that kind of puts together everything I like, puts together history, philosophy, and science. Hopefully it's good. I'm trying to write it in an engaging way. Let's see. And actually, my friend Miguel Segundo, who is also a philosopher that works here with me, are writing a book for the Cambridge Elements series on ecological psychology. It aims
Nice.
to be a short textbook.
Yeah.
We have to finish it in a few months, and then hopefully we'll be out for next year. And the way I see, that's kind of the work I have in mind for the next few months, maybe the next year. Hopefully the next year, because anyway. The way I see it in more generally is that I think ecological neuroscience is growing very little by little, but if we have had a ecological neuroscience symposia in the last 2 ICPA. You see more and more people interested in how this could be possible. We organized 2 workshops in Berlin while I was there, and we had a good attendance, like 25 grad students, and kind of 6, 7, or 8 of them were grad students in a neuroscience department, coming and asking or interested in how can I use ecological psychology in these departments, right? I know there's people that are doing their Ph.D. in the neuroscience of memory. That can be the most cognitivist place you can think of, right?
It is. And that's also a place where I think the ecological ideas have not been very satisfying in their explanations.
Yeah, so I know some people that are actually doing their PhD now on trying to apply dynamical systems ideas and ecological ideas to the study of episodic memory and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think my aim for the next few years is to try to develop more ecological stuff. I'm lucky enough to have funding here in Spain, but also I'm external faculty at the Rodman Institute, where Mike Anderson is, and we have things down there. And actually, I think the best way to go is to try to convince more and more grad students that this is something. I mean, I was talking to I don't remember whom, but you are probably not going to convince Friston to change his mind at this time.
Of course not. Yeah.
Like you are likely not going to convince me either.
Yeah.
I'm so invested in this but so our aim has to be, to try to reach to people,
Yeah.
and to try to do that, right? If you think that something might be not completely right about this, let's try to look
No,
at it.
you're right. I mean, so let's say, you go on YouTube and you find courses, let's say in cognitive psych or neurosciences, right? The first two things pop up are mostly from MIT OpenCourseWare. And apparently, OpenCourseWare is mostly from the David Marr and cognitivist perspective, like fully computational. And if you happen to start with that, like you learn, you have that background, you see everything in the computational light, and we probably need resources at that level to percolate these ideas more in the common psyche at the more graduate and undergraduate levels.
Yeah. Actually, I think there are like we have this Routledge series on resources
Yeah,
on
resources for ecological psychology.
that
Yeah.
is super cool because we just published a book on the work of Harry Heft there,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that's fun. And there are many other books. I think there are some forthcoming ones too
Yes.
soon. We let's say that in the purely academic sphere, we have that thing covered. People know that you can go there to this series of
Yeah.
books and have a lot of resources on ecological psychology.
But in the common discourse, it's still lacking.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of YouTube series on that. Podcasts are that kind of stuff. I have a grant for the next couple of years here, and one of the promises I made is that I'm going to try to record a kind of 5-minute videos or something on affordances information, like to put them on YouTube. It's proving more difficult than it seemed, actually, even to find a proper recording setup and that kind of thing, right? So
We can probably make TikToks.
Yeah. I think we need that. We need to try to reach, to have space, that people can find if they want to.
Right. More accessible.
Yeah.
More accessible, definitely.
Definitely is spelled D-E-F-I-N-I-T.
Sorry, that's Alexa said something and Alexa mistook it. So yeah, that's nice, and a lot of good work to move forward to. I see a lot of books behind you. Any of those relevant you would like to recommend for us to read?
Oh my God, I have very weird things here.
I mean, we don't mind weird things.
Well, I'm going to recommend.
Yeah.
I'm going to recommend One Piece. One Piece is a manga.
Okay.
It's the best-selling manga ever. It has sold more than Batman and that kind of that stuff, and it has 1,000 episodes, and it's one of the best stories I've ever read. So One Piece, very cool. I would recommend a very cool fantasy book. It's called, well, this is the Spanish one, of course. It's called The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. It's a cool thing. This is about non-work, and about work. Something I have here that
So you don't read about work, huh?
No. I think we should find a cool balance between work and non-work. Right?
That's true.
Do I have something here that I read recently and that I really liked? Well, this one is a cool book I read not too long ago, and it's a fun book. It's by Ronald Planner and Kil Esterelny. It's called From Signal to Symbol: The Evolution of Languages. It's a quite interesting book. That kind of says that language comes more from gestures, from actually physical gestures, than from sounds and that kind of things. And I think that sounds ecological to some extent, right?
And there is some evidence, like William Paul and a couple of other folks are doing some really nice, cool experiments, seeing signatures of vocalizations in our gestures.
Yeah. So
right. Yeah. No, that's nice.
Right.
Have you, by the way, heard of a book called Behavior and Culture in One Dimension by Dennis Waters?
Yes.
It is under series for ecological psychology. A beautiful read, like a beautiful, mind-blowing. So I'm having Dennis as well, on the podcast, probably within a week. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So that would be fun. So that was wonderful, Vicente. We got to know a lot about very exciting stuff you have been doing. The limitations of FEP and some really cool non-word books to read. And I hope you would like to come to the podcast again. And I hope to be able to do some episodes where we have where we have opposite views together and have a kind of a back and forth conversation. Not necessarily to conclude one is better than the other, but at least to have a discourse rather than a monologue from one side. So I hope you would be interested in joining.
Sure.
For one of those.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a lot of fun to talk about these things.
Thanks, Vicente. It was a pleasure. Have a great day ahead.